5 musket balls buried in his chest, 20 deep cutlass slashes to the bone. For any ordinary man, this would have been death 3 times over. But Edward Teach, he was still standing. This is Blackbeard. He wove burning, slow-match fuses into his beard, looking like a demon crawling straight out of hell. To the British Empire, he wasn't a man. He was a plague on the seas. He didn't need to fire a single shot. Fear alone made entire fleets surrender. But on this misty morning in 1718, the devil finally bled. This wasn't just a raid. It is a story of betrayal, madness, and a trade so absurd you wouldn't believe it. Can you imagine? This man, worth a fortune in gold, once held an entire city hostage just for a crate of medicine? What killed him wasn't just the Navy's bullets. It was the death knell of the Golden Age of Piracy. Today, let's step back onto that bloody deck and uncover the truth behind Blackbeard's final stand.
1713, the Caribbean, 20 miles south of Port Royal, Jamaica. The sea was as calm as a sheet of dirty blue glass, the stillness broken only by shattered masts and floating driftwood. The air hung heavy with a unique, nauseating yet adrenaline-pumping smell, the scent of black powder sulfur mixed with the metallic tang of blood baking under the tropical sun. For Captain Benjamin Hornigold, standing on the poop deck of his sloop, the Ranger, this was the smell of victory. His cutlass was still dripping blood. Opposite him, a French merchant ship had just been taken. The 2 vessels were locked together, grappling hooks biting deep into the wood like 2 beasts pawed in the act of mating. It was a perfect hunt. "Pry open the hatches! Let's see what the Frenchies brought us!" Hornigold roared, his voice raspy as if his throat were filled with gravel. A savage cheer erupted from the deck. Dozens of ragged, sweat-soaked men swarmed toward the French cargo hold like ants. These were privateers, the legal robbers of the British Empire. For the past 12 years, they had held letters of marque signed by Queen Anne, allowing them to legally plunder French and Spanish ships in these waters. It wasn't a crime, it was patriotism. At least, that's what they believed. A massive young sailor poked his head out of the hold, holding a bottle of brandy, a hideous grin on his face. His name was Edward Teach. Back then, he hadn't yet grown his iconic beard, but his deep-set black eyes already revealed a ferocity and cunning that set him apart. "It's silk, Captain," Teach bellowed, his voice booming like thunder. "And 100 barrels of Bordeaux wine. These French bastards didn't live for nothing." Hornigold nodded with satisfaction. This haul was worth at least £2,000. By the rules, 10% went to the Crown, and the rest was split among the crew. Every man would have enough to live like a king in Port Royal for a month. But just then, the lookout shouted, panic edging his voice. "Ship! 2 o'clock! It's the Royal Navy!" Hornigold whipped around, raising his brass telescope. On the horizon, a massive 3-masted warship was bearing down on them, sails full. The red cross of St. George was emblazoned on the white canvas, and the black gun ports along her sides looked like a row of shark's teeth. It was the HMS Scarborough, a 5th-rate warship with 30 guns. "Don't panic," Hornigold lowered the telescope, smoothing his blood-stained blue coat. "It's one of ours. Raise the Union Jack. Let these Navy boys see what a good job we've done." He thought it would be a friendly meeting. Perhaps the captain would invite him for tea and praise him for striking a blow against the French economy. He was wrong. The Scarborough didn't slow down. It approached like a moving mountain until its massive shadow engulfed the 2 small ships. "Ranger, strike your sails immediately. Prepare to be boarded." The voice from the speaking trumpet was cold, arrogant, and carried the nasal tone of London high society. Hornigold frowned. The tone was wrong, but he waved his hand, signaling his men to comply.
A longboat was lowered from the warship, carrying a lieutenant in a crisp uniform and a squad of heavily armed Marines. Their boots were polished, their white breeches spotless, forming a stark contrast to the blood-spattered privateers. The lieutenant climbed aboard, not even deigning to look Hornigold in the eye. He covered his nose with a handkerchief, as if the air here were poisonous. "I am Captain Hornigold." He stepped forward, trying to force a smile. "We have just captured a French—" "I know who you are, and I don't care what you've captured. I bring orders from London." Hornigold's heart sank. The sailors on the deck went quiet. Edward Teach's hand, gripping the brandy bottle, bulged with veins. "The war," the lieutenant announced loudly, his voice reaching every corner of the deck, "is over." Dead silence. "Just last month, the Treaty of Utrecht was signed. The British Empire is at peace with the Kingdom of France and the Spanish Empire." The lieutenant folded the parchment and looked at the men as if they were trash. "This means that the letter of marque you hold is now just a piece of waste paper." "What?" Hornigold felt a buzzing in his head. "Then this ship?" "This French ship is now a legally protected merchant vessel." The lieutenant pointed to the prize laden with silk and wine. "Your actions just now are no longer privateering." He paused, a cruel smile touching his lips. "They are acts of piracy." "Bullshit!" Teach couldn't help but roar, stepping forward. "Where were you when we bled for the Queen? Now a piece of paper is going to take our prize?" "Back down, you filthy cur!" The Marines behind the lieutenant instantly raised their muskets, dark muzzles aimed at Teach's chest. Hornigold reached out to stop Teach. He knew that if Teach moved another inch, their small ship would be blown to splinters by the Scarborough's 30 guns. "So, sir," he lowered his rage, "it's our royal. What are we to do? We have 60 men. Everyone is counting on this money to eat." "That is your problem." The lieutenant dusted an imaginary speck off his sleeve. "The orders are clear. Release the French ship, surrender your weapons, and go back to Port Royal. If you're lucky, you might find work as dockhands." He glanced back at the massive warship. "If you refuse, the Scarborough will be happy to treat you as pirates and execute you on the spot." The lieutenant left with the arrogance of a victor, returning to his giant ship. He left Hornigold and Teach with an impossible choice. The noon sun baked the deck, yet everyone felt a bone-deep chill. Edward Teach walked to the rail, watching the French merchant ship slowly sail away, wealth they had risked their lives for, now handed over. "Dockhands?" Teach repeated the word in a whisper, then laughed. It was a low, neurotic sound from deep in his throat. "Captain, did you hear that? He told us to be dockhands." Hornigold said nothing. His fingers gripped the rail so hard his knuckles turned white. "We killed for the king, bled for him." Teach turned, the fire in his eyes threatening to ignite the air. "Now that the king doesn't need us, he throws us away like a used rag." The sailors gathered around. Their eyes were filled with confusion, anger, and fear. They were used to the sea, to freedom. To go back to land and be enslaved, that was worse than death. "I won't do it," a one-eyed sailor spat on the deck. "I'd rather die than move boxes in Port Royal." "Me too! Screw the treaty!" Anger spread like wildfire. Hornigold took a deep breath. He looked up at the Union Jack fluttering at the masthead, the flag he had served for half his life. In this moment it looked so glaring, so hypocritical. He looked back at the Scarborough. The warship representing law and order was watching them like a sheepdog. "Edward," Hornigold finally spoke, his voice strangely calm. "Have you ever been to the Bahamas?" Teach paused, then understood. That savage grin returned to his face. "Nassau? That's a rotten place, Captain. Nothing but sand, mosquitoes, and scoundrels." "And the water is shallow," Hornigold added, his eyes sharpening. "Too shallow for a big ship like the Scarborough to enter." The two men locked eyes. In that instant, a mad decision was made in silence.
Hornigold pulled his cutlass from the rail and waved it in the sunlight. "Brothers," he shouted, "the British Navy says we are pirates. Since they've already convicted us, why should we disappoint them?" The crowd was silent for a second, then erupted in a roar more fanatical than when they had captured the prize. "Go take that French ship back," Hornigold ordered. "That's our money. No one takes it." "And then what, Captain?" Teach licked his lips excitedly. "Where do we go?" Hornigold pointed south to a chaotic patch of sea untainted by law. "We go to Nassau. If the civilized world doesn't want us, we'll build our own world." Then Hornigold did something that would go down in history. He walked to the mast and personally untied the flag symbolizing royal authority. It fell to the deck, trampled by bare feet. "Raise the flag," Hornigold said coldly. "Raise the black." Although they didn't have the skull and crossbones yet, a pitch-black canvas rose slowly, snapping in the wind. It wasn't just a piece of cloth, it was a declaration of war. From this moment, they were no longer privateer Benjamin Hornigold and sailor Edward Teach. They were pirates. The lookout on the Scarborough watched in horror as the small ship, which he thought had submitted, suddenly turned its bow and charged like a rabid dog at the released French merchant ship. Cannons roared. It was the first shot of the peace and the first cry of the Golden Age of Piracy.
The Flies of Nassau, 1715, New Providence Island, Nassau. If Port Royal was the crown of the Caribbean, Nassau was the festering wound beneath it. When Benjamin Hornigold's sloop carefully navigated the dangerous shallows and reefs into the harbor, they were greeted not by gun salutes, but by flies. Millions of flies. They hung like a black fog over the beach, making a maddening buzzing sound. They landed on dead fish, on excrement, and on the faces of men lying drunk on the sand. Edward Teach stood at the bow, waving away the disgusting insects. He squinted at this legendary sanctuary. "This is your new world?" Teach turned to Hornigold, a smirk on his lips. "Captain, this place looks like an open-air latrine." Hornigold didn't argue. Teach was right. The scene before them wasn't so much a city as a giant, filthy refugee camp. Along the curved beach lay a chaotic jumble of hundreds of tents and shacks. Some were made of palm leaves, some of old sails, some were just overturned boat hulls. There were no streets, only muddy paths. Sewage flowed freely. Pigs and chickens scavenged in trash heaps. In the distance, the fort that once symbolized British authority was now just ruins, a few rusted cannons pointing crookedly at the sky like the bones of a dead giant. "It's rotten, Edward," Hornigold inhaled deeply, as if savoring the unique stench. "But it's free, and most importantly, the water here is only 2 fathoms deep. British ships of the line can't get in unless they want to ground themselves and feed the sharks." The longboat hit the sand. As their boots sank into the mixture of mud and shells, the crowd around them stirred. And what a crowd it was! There were black slaves who had escaped Jamaican plantations, their backs scarred from whips. London gamblers wanted for debt, sailors accused of mutiny, and drunks who just wanted to die with a bottle in hand. They were ragged, their eyes hollow, like beasts trapped in a cage. A one-legged old sailor sat on a piece of driftwood, picking sand fleas out of his toes with a rusty knife. Next to him, a woman wearing only a filthy petticoat was screaming at a passed-out man, demanding her shilling. "Hey, look who it is!" Someone recognized them. "It's Hornigold. It's the Ranger. I heard they just took a French wine ship." The word wine was like a magic spell, instantly igniting the passion of these walking dead. Dozens of men surrounded them, greedy eyes darting over Hornigold and Teach. It was the look of hunger and of assessment. Here, if you weren't tough enough, you'd be stripped naked within 5 minutes of stepping ashore. Hornigold stopped and looked around. He knew that to establish a foothold in this wolf's den, stolen cargo wasn't enough. He needed to show power. "Bring the wine down," Hornigold roared at the longboat behind him. "Let's wet the throats of these thirsty bastards." A cheer went up. Barrels of Bordeaux were rolled onto the beach. Someone split a cask open with an axe, and red wine sprayed out like blood. No one looked for cups. Men drank directly from the barrel or cupped it in their hands, fighting like livestock. Teach watched, his hand resting on his pistol. He was disgusted by them, but he could feel a primal power surging beneath the chaos. These people were dry tinder. They just needed a spark. Hornigold jumped onto an empty barrel, drew his cutlass, and pointed it at the sky. "Listen!" The noise died down. People looked up at the man who had brought them wine. "I know why you are here," Hornigold's voice cut through the buzzing of the flies. "Because the world out there doesn't want you. In London, in Port Royal, you are scum, criminals, slaves." Growls of agreement came from the crowd. "They tell you the war is over." Hornigold scanned their faces. "They tell you to go back and starve or slave away for those fat merchant captains." "Screw the merchant captains," a man with a scarred face yelled. "Right," Hornigold laughed. "Screw them. But I tell you, the war isn't over. This is a new war, not for a king, not for a queen, but for ourselves." He pointed to the blue ocean. "Out there are countless merchant ships, Spanish, French, even British. Their holds are full of gold, silver, silk, and sugar. Those things were meant for kings and nobles. But I ask you, who braves the storms? Who bleeds? Us. Why should they eat meat in castles while we eat rotten fish here?" "It's not fair," someone shouted. "Then take it back," Hornigold roared, his face fierce. "In Nassau there is no law. If you follow me, we make our own laws. We split the loot equally. We elect our own captains. We live like kings. Nassau doesn't belong to England. Nassau belongs to the pirates." The crowd exploded. The pent-up anger, greed, and despair found a release. Hundreds of fists punched the sky. Hundreds of throats screamed, "Pirates! Pirates! Pirates!" Teach watched Hornigold with newfound respect. He wasn't just a robber, he was an orator. He was turning this trash into an army. Amid the frenzy, a man in a red velvet coat parted the crowd. His clothes were dirty, but they still hinted at former wealth. He held a cane, his eyes cold and arrogant. It was Henry Jennings, the uncrowned king of Nassau, or perhaps the wealthiest scoundrel. Jennings walked up to Hornigold and swatted a fly away with his cane. "A fine speech, Benjamin," Jennings sneered, "but slogans don't fill bellies. The Spanish treasure fleet sank off the coast of Florida. There are millions of pesos in gold sitting there." Hornigold narrowed his eyes. "What do you want, Henry?" "I need ships and I need men." Jennings looked at the fanatical crowd. "We partner up. You bring the men, I bring the intel. We go take that gold." Hornigold smiled. He knew it was a dangerous alliance. Jennings was a greedy lunatic. But this was the first pot of gold that would turn Nassau into a real republic. "Edward," Hornigold turned to Teach, "you see, this place stinks, but it smells like opportunity." Teach grinned, revealing yellowed teeth, drew 2 pistols and fired them into the air. Bang! Bang! The gunshots scared off the flies. "Let's do it, Captain. Let's make this the capital of hell." Night fell. Countless bonfires were lit on the beach of Nassau. Cheap rum burned in veins, and violence bred in the shadows. On this lawless night, a new order was being born in chaos. These people, abandoned by the world, were about to show the world their fangs. And far away on the coast of Florida, those Spanish soldiers salvaging gold had no idea that a pack of hungry wolves was sharpening its teeth, preparing to pounce.
The Pirate Code.
That night, a massive bonfire was lit on the beach of Nassau. Flames licked the night sky, illuminating over 100 faces sitting around it. The air smelled of roasting wild boar and sweet rum, but the mood was strangely serious. No fighting, no shouting. Tonight they were doing something more important than killing. Benjamin Hornigold sat on an overturned rum barrel, a wrinkled piece of parchment spread on his knees. It was the back of a Dutch chart, now covered in dense writing. Edward Teach stood behind him like a black iron tower, holding a quill dipped in ink. "Listen up," Hornigold cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the crackle of the fire. "Before we go to Florida to get rich, some rules must be clear." He held up the parchment. "In the Royal Navy, the rules are written on your backs with a whip. There you eat biscuits crawling with maggots, drink foul water, and get 9 lashes for moving too slow. If you get hurt, lose a leg, what does the Navy give you? 6 pence and a kick onto the streets of London to beg." Angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. Everyone remembered the humiliation. The one-legged sailor touched his wooden peg, hate flashing in his eyes. "But on this ship," Hornigold raised his voice, "on the Ranger, we don't believe in kings or admiralties. We believe in this." He pointed to the text. "These are our articles. This is the contract we sign with the world and with each other." Hornigold began to read. Every clause hit like a hammer on the hearts of these lowly sailors. Article 1. Every man has an equal vote in affairs of moment. Where to raid, whether to fight, when to dock. 1 man, 1 vote. The captain only has absolute command during battle. Otherwise, he is just a sailor like you. The crowd stirred. For men used to obeying orders, such power was unheard of. Article 2. Distribution of loot. The captain and quartermaster get 2 shares. The boatswain and gunner 1.5. The doctor 1.25. All other sailors 1 share. No aristocrats taking the lion's share. No government tax. Absolute fairness based on labor. Article 3, and most importantly, Hornigold paused, looking at the one-legged sailor, injury compensation. If a man loses his right hand in battle, 600 pieces of 8, left hand 500, right leg 500, left leg 400, an eye 100. If he is killed, the money goes to his partner or family. Dead silence, followed by thunderous applause. Some men even wept. In the 18th century, where life was cheap, these demons had established the world's first social security system. 600 pieces of 8 was enough to buy a farm in the country and live in peace. It meant they weren't fighting for today's bread, but for future dignity. "Now," Hornigold held out the quill, "whoever agrees, come sign. If you can't write, make your mark." One by one, the ragged men stepped forward. There was no Bible here. Pirates didn't believe in that. Instead, they pulled a battle axe and a cutlass from the pile of weapons and crossed them on a barrel. This was their holy relic. The first to step up was a 16-year-old boy, still baby-faced. Shaking, he placed his hand on the crossed steel and swore, "I swear by the blade I will be true to these articles, death to the betrayer." Then he clumsily scratched a crooked X on the paper. The line moved slowly. Some drew circles, some pressed fingerprints. Hornigold watched as every man who signed received a cup of rum. Finally, it was Edward Teach's turn. The giant pushed through the crowd to the barrel. He didn't make a mark. He took the quill, and with an elegance that contradicted his brutal appearance, flowed the name that would make the world tremble onto the paper. Edward Teach. He turned to the crowd, eyes burning with a fanatical light. "Remember this name, brothers. One day it will be louder than any king's." The signing ceremony ended, but there was one last step. "We have a captain," Hornigold announced, "but to prevent the captain from becoming a tyrant, we need a quartermaster." This was the genius of the pirate system. The quartermaster was the check and balance. He distributed food, managed the loot, and even had the power to vote out the captain if he abused his power. "I nominate Edward Teach," someone shouted. "Teach! Teach!" The crowd echoed. The man was terrifying, but he was literate, strong, and never cheated on the loot. Teach stepped forward. He didn't refuse. He accepted the position. From that moment, he and Hornigold became the two heads of the eagle, one for strategy, one for execution, one for authority, one for the brotherhood. Night deepened. The bonfires faded. Over 100 pirates who had signed the contract lay on the sand listening to the waves. The parchment was carefully rolled up and locked in the captain's chest. It was more precious than gold. Nearby, Henry Jennings' fleet was already hoisting sails. The Ranger began to bustle. The anchor chain rattled. Canvas filled with the night breeze. Hornigold stood at the helm, Teach beside him. "To Florida," Hornigold ordered, "to get our gold back." The bow cut through the black waves. They were off. This wasn't a normal voyage. It was an expedition of armed socialists, anarchists, and desperados going to challenge an empire's army for a legacy left by a natural disaster. Ahead, on the Florida coast, Spanish soldiers guarded that mountain of gold, thinking they were safe. They had no idea they weren't facing a ragtag group, but a pirate republic with a strict organization and a shared belief.
Before the storm. July 24th, 1715, Havana Harbor, Cuba. Don Juan Esteban de Ubilla, general of the Spanish treasure fleet, stood on the poop deck of his flagship, the Capitana, looking anxiously at the sky. The sky was blue, that postcard-perfect Caribbean blue, but in Ubilla's eyes, that blue hid murder. The air was suffocatingly hot and still. The sea was as calm as stagnant water. Even the seagulls had stopped crying. It was the calm before the storm. As the commander of the treasure fleet, Ubilla bore the weight of an entire empire. Look at this fleet, 11 massive galleons, like floating castles crowding the harbor. They sat dangerously low in the water, so low the lower gun ports were almost submerged. Why? Because they were too heavy. Due to the War of the Spanish Succession, lasting over a decade, the fleet had been blockaded in the Americas, unable to return. This meant this wasn't just 1 year's tax revenue, it was years of accumulated wealth. The holds were packed with silver ingots from Mexico, gold bars from Peru, emeralds from Colombia, and silk and ivory from the Philippines. Even the ballast stones had been thrown out and replaced with heavy silver coins. This fleet carried 14 million pesos, enough to buy half of Europe and enough to pay off all the war debts of the Spanish king. The king in Madrid was waiting for this money. The bankers were waiting. The empire was waiting. "General, the weather vane moved," the first mate whispered, interrupting Ubilla's thoughts. Ubilla wiped sweat from his forehead. It was late July. Any experienced sailor knew this was the start of hurricane season. Sailing now was sticking your head in a lion's mouth. He had begged to wait for winter, but the order from Madrid was one word: go. The king couldn't wait. "Raise sails," Ubilla sighed, giving the command that would doom thousands. "We go home." The fleet slowly left Havana, sailing north along the Florida Straits. For the first 3 days, all was well. The breeze was gentle, the current pushed them forward. Sailors sang on deck, dreaming of riches atop the cargo holds. But on July 30th, the world changed. In the morning, the sun rose with an eerie blood-red halo. The mercury in the barometer dropped like a kite with a cut string. At noon, the wind stopped. Absolute stillness. The air became sticky, smelling of ozone. The sea turned lead gray, as if boiling. In the afternoon, the first gust hit. It didn't blow, it collided. "Strike sails! Strike them fast!"
Ubia screamed in the rain. Too late. Hurricane San Ignacio hit the fleet at 100 miles an hour. In that instant, heaven and earth inverted. Massive masts snapped like toothpicks, making terrible cracking sounds. Sails were shredded, dancing wildly in the wind, sounding like firecrackers. Tons of seawater smashed onto the decks, washing sailors overboard like ants. It was the primal fear of humanity. In the face of nature's absolute violence, gold, power, and technology became jokes. Night fell, doubling the terror. In the pitch black, you could see nothing, only hear hell. The wind screaming, wood groaning, and men thrown overboard screaming for help. The Capitana was disintegrating. The gold and silver in the hold became killers. As the ship rolled violently, the ropes holding the cargo snapped. Tons of silver chests slid around the hold, smashing ribs and punching through the hull like bowling balls. The ship was killed by its own greed. "Reefs! Starboard!" That was the Florida coast. For ships, it was worse than the deep sea. Razor-sharp coral reefs waited for them. Boom! A crash louder than thunder. The flagship hit the reef. The bottom tore open instantly. Water rushed in, not into empty space, but into a treasury filled with gold and silver. The heavy metal dragged the hull down immediately. Ubia gripped the rail, watching his fleet smash into the coast one by one. Some were crushed on the beach by giant waves, some sliced in half by reefs, others capsized, trapping hundreds underwater. In that final moment, perhaps he thought of the king's rush or the warning about the season, but it was over. Over 1,000 Spanish sailors lost their lives that night. When the sun rose the next morning, the storm had passed, revealing a hellscape on the Florida coast. Miles of beach were littered with shattered planks, broken masts, and swollen corpses. And under the shallow, turquoise water, amidst the white sand, lay countless glittering objects. Gold coins, silver ingots, emerald necklaces. They littered the seabed like trash. Crabs crawled over priceless gold plates. Fish swam between scattered pearls. The few hundred Spanish survivors crawled onto the beach, soaking wet. They looked at the wreckage in despair. They had survived, but they had lost the empire's wallet. They began to set up camp on the beach, trying to salvage the wealth. They sent fast horses to the nearby Spanish colony of St. Augustine for help. But they forgot one thing. The Spanish weren't the only ones in these waters. The wind blew the scent of disaster south. It was the scent of money and blood. Hundreds of miles away in Nassau, Benjamin Hornigold and Edward Teach were polishing their cutlasses. They didn't know the details yet, but rumors at sea spread like sharks smelling blood. The greatest gold rush or robbery in history was about to erupt on this beach covered in corpses and gold. It wasn't salvage, it was war. Chapter 5. Gold Fever. Mid-August 1715, the Broken Anchor Tavern, Nassau. This was a place where the air itself could ignite. Smoke from cheap tobacco swirled under the low ceiling, and whale oil lamps cast a dim yellow light, barely illuminating the greasy wooden tables and even greasier faces. Here, rumors were usually cheaper than rum. Every day someone bragged about finding a new continent or burying treasure on a desert island. Usually these words earned only mockery and empty bottles. But today was different. When a small boat sailor named John stumbled into the tavern, soaked to the bone, eyes wide as copper bells, as if he'd seen a ghost or god, he slammed something on the sticky bar. Ding! The crisp sound of metal cut through the noisy tavern like a knife. The clamor vanished instantly. Everyone's eyes focused on the small piece of metal. In the dim light, it emitted a captivating, bewitching yellow glow. It was a Spanish doubloon, stamped with the profile of King Philip V, its edges encrusted with sea sand and salt. "Where did you get that?" The bartender's voice trembled. He reached out, but John pinned the coin down. "Florida," John gasped, greedily licking his cracked lips. "The Palmar de IS coast, the whole fleet, it's all there." He swallowed, looking around at the hundreds of glowing wolf eyes. "Not one ship, 11. The sea is paved with them, like cobblestones." Boom.
The tavern exploded. Gold fever. It wasn't just a phrase, it was a disease, more potent than malaria, spreading faster than scurvy. In that instant, Nassau changed. 1 second, it was a dead drunk tank. The next, it was a frenzied arsenal. You could see men running out of the tavern, smashing rum bottles on the ground. Who cared about that rot gut? It was a poor man's drink. Now they would drink wine from gold chalices. The port descended into hysterical activity. Blacksmith forges burned all night. Clang, clang, clang. Men lined up to sharpen cutlasses and repair boarding axes. "No money for repairs? No problem. I'll give you a gold bar when I get back," became the universal currency. Supply prices skyrocketed tenfold overnight. A barrel of gunpowder was worth half a life. A bag of clean biscuits could trade for a woman. On the beach, Benjamin Hornigold was checking the rigging of the Ranger. He moved fast but steadily. Unlike the maniacs, he knew this trip wasn't for collecting seashells. "Look over there," Hornigold jutted his chin toward the other side of the harbor. Edward Teach was loading a musket. He looked up and saw a massive force. It was Henry Jennings. The wealthy ex-privateer captain had mobilized all his resources in Nassau. He assembled 3 large ships and over 300 heavily armed thugs. They were loading crates of gunpowder and cannonballs. Jennings stood on the dock in his signature red velvet coat, commanding with cold calculation. There was no nouveau riche joy on his face, only icy math. "He doesn't want to dive for gold," Teach narrowed his eyes, sharp as a hawk. "He's bringing too many guns and too few divers." "Right," Hornigold sneered. "On that beach right now, it must be crowded with Spanish soldiers and surviving sailors. They're working hard to pull the gold up and pile it on the sand. So Jennings plans to let the Spanish do the work and then rob them blind," Teach finished, ramming the rod into the barrel. "Smart bastard." "And a dangerous bastard," Hornigold patted Teach's shoulder. "We have to be fast. If we're late, we won't even get the dregs." It was a race, a death race. The starting line was Nassau Harbor. Dozens of ships scrambled to raise sails, sloops, brigs, armed fishing boats. The sea was crowded with white sails like a school of hungry white sharks surging toward the northern exit. No one followed navigation rules. Ships collided in the narrow channel. Sailors cursed each other from the rails, waving fists and knives. "Move! Get out of the way! That gold is mine!" Greed made them lose their minds. Some ships turned too sharply and grounded in the harbor. Men jumped into the water, desperate, swimming to other ships, begging to be taken along. The Ranger, under Hornigold's masterful handling, cut through the chaotic fleet like an agile barracuda. As they cleared the harbor and entered the open sea, Teach looked back. Nassau, behind them, was empty. Only the old, the sick, and the whores remained on the shore, watching the expedition force with complicated eyes. The wind howled, bringing the salty taste of the ocean. Teach stood at the bow, taking a deep breath. He felt the blood rushing in his veins. This wasn't just for money. For years they had hidden like rats from the Navy, begged for work like paupers. But now they were a fleet, an army assembled for desire. "Captain," Teach whispered, staring at the deep blue ahead. "I don't think whatever's waiting for us on that beach is God's grace." Hornigold gripped the wheel, eyes cold. "Of course it's not God's grace, Edward. It's the devil's bait. There will be a lot of blood." "Then let it bleed." Teach touched the pistol at his waist, a hideous smile forming. "As long as it's Spanish blood." The massive, chaotic pirate fleet sailed north in force.
Hundreds of miles ahead, on the sunny, gold-strewn beach of Florida, the Spanish camp commander was still directing soldiers to move crates of silver into the warehouse. He looked at the filling warehouse, heart full of the joy of recovery. He had no idea that just over the horizon, a pack of true demons was approaching. This would be the largest collective action in the history of Caribbean piracy. The rules of the civilized world were about to be thoroughly shattered on the sands of Florida. Red Dawn at Florida. September 17th, east coast of Florida, Palmar de Ayes. Fog. Thick, salty sea fog draped over the morning beach like a shroud. The Spanish camp was still sleeping. Only a few embers smoked, remnants of grilled fish from the night before. After a month of grueling salvage work, the surviving Spanish sailors and soldiers were exhausted. They had piled 350,000 pesos in a makeshift wooden warehouse, believing the king's army would come to relieve them soon. They didn't expect the relief to come from Nassau. Henry Jennings lay behind a sand dune 300 yards from the camp. The dew soaked his expensive red velvet coat, but he didn't move a muscle. Behind him, 300 pirates lay in the cold, wet sand like a pack of wolves, waiting for a signal, flintlocks primed. "Look at that sentry," Jennings whispered to his lieutenant. "He's dozing off. Even God is helping us." On the wooden watchtower, a young Spanish soldier hugged his musket, head nodding in sleep. He might have been dreaming of orange groves in Valencia, but he would never wake up.
"Go," Jennings ordered coldly. No shouting, no bugles. This wasn't a knight's war, it was a bandit's raid. Dozens of the best marksmen raised their long guns. Bang, bang, bang! A volley of gunfire tore through the dawn silence. White smoke rose from the dunes. The sentry's chest exploded in a mist of blood. He fell like a rag doll, crashing heavily onto the sand. "Kill them all! Leave no one!" Jennings drew his saber and stood up. 300 throats erupted in a savage roar. The pirates surged over the dunes like a black tide, rushing the defenseless camp. The Spanish panicked. Soldiers ran out of tents in their underwear, grabbing blindly for weapons, terror on their faces. Before they knew who the enemy was, they were cut down by lead balls. "For the gold!" Edward Teach was in the charging crowd. He was like a runaway chariot, swinging a heavy cutlass. A Spanish officer tried to organize resistance, drawing his sword and shouting, "Form ranks! Form ranks!" But Teach didn't play by rules. He didn't duel. He pulled a pistol from his belt and pulled the trigger from 2 meters away. A loud bang, and the officer's face disappeared. It was a one-sided slaughter. These Spaniards were excellent sailors, but they faced desperados. Pirates had no honor. They threw sand in eyes, bit throats, kneed groins. Blood stained the white sand red, seeping under the piles of treasure chests. 20 minutes, that's all it took. The battle was over. 60 Spanish soldiers were corpses. The rest fled into the jungle behind them, leaving the mountain of gold to the demons. Jennings kicked a body aside and walked to the warehouse door. He smashed the lock with the hilt of his sword. The door opened. Morning sunlight pierced the fog, illuminating the dim warehouse. In that instant, everyone stopped breathing. Silver, piles of it like small mountains, chests full of gold bars. They sat there, silently shining, reflecting a bewitching light. This was the legendary 350,000 pesos. No one spoke, only heavy breathing. Even the greediest pirates were stunned. They had robbed silk, sugar, rum, but never had they seen so much direct money. "We're rich!" Teach stood before the silver mountain, blood drying on his face, revealing a hideous, ecstatic grin. "We are truly rich!" Chapter 7. The First Prize. If you want to know what humanity looks like in the face of ultimate wealth, you should have seen that Florida beach that morning. Nobility vanished. Brotherhood tottered. The pirates rushed the warehouse like madmen. They grabbed handfuls of silver coins, stuffing them in pockets, boots, even mouths. Some took off their shirts, tying the sleeves to make bags. "Don't grab, that's mine! Let go, you mongrel!" Two pirates wrestled on the ground over a gold bar, knives drawn. It wasn't until Jennings fired a warning shot that the beasts were tamed. "Stop it!" Jennings roared, his red coat glaring in the sun. "Anyone who steals for himself gets nailed to the beach for the crabs. Follow the rules, load the ships, we split in Nassau." It was a massive undertaking. 350,000 pesos weighed tons. For the next 3 days, pirates formed long lines like porters, moving crates of treasure to longboats and then to the big ships. During this, Benjamin Hornigold stayed calm. He didn't lose his composure like the others. He stood on the deck of the Ranger, watching the heavy crates being hoisted aboard, eyes deep. "What are you thinking, Captain?" Teach walked over, tossing a silver coin. "Isn't this enough to make you smile?" "It's too much, Edward," Hornigold whispered. "It's too much money. It will bring trouble." "Trouble?" Teach sneered. "With this money we can buy half the Caribbean. Best guns, fastest ships. Who dares trouble us?" "The King of England," Hornigold looked north. "We just robbed the Spanish treasury. That means we aren't just pirates. We are sinners causing a diplomatic incident. From today, every navy in these waters will hunt us." Teach was silent, then flipped the coin high and caught it. "Let them come." Teach's voice was low, metallic. "We can't go back anyway. Since we're demons, let's be the biggest ones." When the laden fleet returned to Nassau, the port boiled over. It was a feast of debauchery. Every pirate involved got about 1,000 pounds. At the time, that was 30 years of wages for a London laborer. Rich overnight. Nassau became completely depraved. Wine was drunk dry. Poker chips became gold coins. Men threw money in the streets, bought every whore. But for Teach, the money wasn't for wasting. He took his share and walked into a weapons shop. He brought 4 of the best short-barreled muskets, a high-quality French cutlass, and crates of the finest gunpowder. He knew Hornigold was right. War was coming, and he was arming himself. Chapter 8. Raising the Black. Early 1716. The consequences of the raid finally appeared. News reached London and Madrid. The furious Spanish ambassador screamed at King George I, demanding the pirates hang. The British government felt the pressure. They couldn't let their colony become a bandit's den. Wanted posters were plastered in every Caribbean port. Benjamin Hornigold, Henry Jennings, Edward Teach, these names were on the enemies of the empire list. In the headquarters tent in Nassau, the mood was grim. "We accept amnesty or we die," someone suggested. Rumors swirled that the king might issue a pardon if we returned the loot. Hornigold sat at the table, looking at these newly rich but terrified pirates. "Return the loot?" Hornigold sneered. "You spent it on whores and gambling. What will you return?" Silence. "We have no retreat." Hornigold stood up, walking to the map. "From the moment we robbed the Spanish camp, we declared war on the civilized world." He turned, eyes burning. "Since they call us public enemies, let's be competent ones." He pulled a flag from a chest. It wasn't a normal black flag. It was designed. A white skull on a black background, holding a spear piercing a red heart. "Raise it," Hornigold ordered. "Tell all ships out sea, if you surrender, this is the outcome. If you resist, we kill everyone." This was the origin of the Jolly Roger. It was psychological warfare. Its meaning was simple. Surrender, and we only take money. Resist, and you die.
That afternoon, every pirate ship in Nassau lowered their national flags. Dozens of black flags snapped in the wind. This marked the official founding of the Pirate Republic. They were no longer scattered drifters. They were an alliance. They controlled the Bahamas, cutting off trade routes. In this alliance, Edward Teach stood on the bow of the Ranger, looking at the black flag, and something changed inside him. He realized guns and knives weren't enough. Pirates needed a symbol, a totem that would scare enemies to death at a glance. And he decided to become that totem. Volume 2, The Theater of Terror. Chapter 1, The Devil's Mask. Edward Teach was a smart man. Many people overlooked this fact. Although he looked like a bear, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders as wide as a doorframe and immense strength, he wasn't just a brute. He was literate, and he understood psychology. During the raids of 1716, Teach discovered a problem. Fighting is expensive. Every time they boarded a ship for hand-to-hand combat, men died. A dead sailor meant paying out hundreds of silver coins in compensation to his family. It meant spending money to repair the ship and buying expensive medicine. How can I win without fighting? This question plagued him. One night in a tavern in Nassau, he watched a brawl. A skinny madman covered in red paint and screaming like a banshee charged at a group of large men. The large men, terrified by the sheer insanity of the display, ran away. In that moment, Teach understood. Fear. Fear was the cheapest, most efficient weapon. If you could make your enemy believe you were a demon crawled straight out of hell, they would kneel and beg for mercy before firing a single shot. So, Edward Teach began a meticulous process of image design. It was perhaps the earliest example of personal brand marketing in history. He started with the beard. It wasn't an ordinary beard. It was a thick, black bush that grew from below his eyes down to his chest. Before a battle, he would braid it into pigtails, tying each one with a red ribbon. But that wasn't enough. Before a battle against a British merchant ship, Teach did something that made everyone's skin crawl. He took several slow match fuses, cords made of hemp soaked in saltpeter and lime water, used to light cannons. He tucked them under his hat, wedged them behind his ears, and even wove them into his beard. "Light them," he ordered his lieutenant. When the fuses were lit, they didn't produce an open flame. They sputtered and hissed, emitting thick, acrid black smoke. Imagine the scene. As the merchant sailors watched in terror as the pirate ship approached, they saw a massive black shadow leap onto their deck. This giant was draped in bandoliers of pistols and cutlasses, and framing his wild hair and terrifying black beard was a halo of black smoke and sparks. Within that smoke, his wild eyes flashed with an inhuman light. This wasn't a man, this was Satan himself, fresh from the lake of fire. "I am Blackbeard," he roared, his voice cutting through the smoke like thunder. The effect was devastating. The sailors, who had planned to resist, felt their psychological defenses crumble the moment they saw this smoking demon. They dropped their weapons and fell to their knees in prayer, thinking Judgment Day had arrived. In that battle, Blackbeard didn't fire a single shot. He didn't swing his cutlass once. The merchant ship surrendered unconditionally. From that day on, the name Blackbeard was no longer just a person. It became a legend, a curse. Rumors spread like wildfire across the Caribbean. "Did you hear? There's a pirate captain who eats glass. I heard he lights his beard on fire. They say he's the devil's bastard son." Teach listened to these rumors and smiled with satisfaction. This was exactly what he wanted. But he was missing one last thing, a ride worthy of the title King of Pirates. The Ranger was too small. He needed a monster, a giant ship that could hold hundreds of men and go head-to-head with the Royal Navy. Fate would soon deliver him this ship. Originally built to transport slaves, it would go down in history with a bloody name, the Queen Anne's Revenge. Chapter 2. The Birth of the Queen Anne's Revenge. November 1717, the waters near St. Vincent. Blackbeard, we must call him that now, stood on the deck of his new prize, the La Concorde. It was a French slave ship he had just captured.
It was huge, 300 tons of displacement, with a sleek hull designed to cross the Atlantic quickly. It's a good ship, but it's not mean enough. By this time, Blackbeard was no longer Hornigold's lieutenant. Hornigold, insisting on his principle of never robbing British ships, had been voted out by his crew. Blackbeard had taken command of the fleet, becoming the true leader. He looked at the slave ship, madness flickering in his eyes. "Refit it," Blackbeard ordered. "Tear out all the bulkheads used to cage the slaves. Clear the space." "Clear it for what, Captain?" "Cannons." Usually, a merchant ship of this size carrying only a dozen guns, but Blackbeard was a maniac. He cut more gun ports into the deck and stuffed the hold with extra gunpowder. In the end, he forced 40 cannons on this ship. 40! You have to understand, the main warships the British Navy used to patrol the Caribbean at that time only carried 30 guns. This meant Blackbeard's pirate ship had more firepower than a regular naval vessel. This was unprecedented in pirate history. Usually, pirates relied on speed and surprise, running away when they saw a warship. Blackbeard didn't plan to run. He planned to blast anything in his way into driftwood. He gave the ship a new name. The name was full of political metaphor, full of anger at their abandoned fate, and full of nostalgia. Queen Anne's Revenge. When this black beast flying the skeleton flag and bristling with 40 guns first appeared on the horizon, the entire Caribbean trembled. It wasn't just a ship, it was a mobile fortress at sea. Now Blackbeard had his demon mask and his invincible warship. The stage was set. The actors were in place. He was ready to stage the craziest act of his career. He wasn't going to rob a ship. He was going to kidnap a city. Target? Charleston. This would be the most arrogant moment of the Golden Age of Piracy and the peak of Blackbeard's madness. Chapter 3. The Siege of Charleston. May 1718. Charleston, South Carolina. This bustling port city was the jewel of the British colonies in America. Wealthy plantation owners lived here, along with ladies in silk and thousands of slaves. The people here believed they were far removed from the chaos of the Caribbean, protected by the Royal Navy, a bastion of the civilized world. But this morning, civilization collapsed. As the first rays of sunlight hit the waters outside Charleston Harbor, early rising fishermen saw a sight that froze their blood. Not one ship, a fleet. 4 pirate ships flying black flags, lined up like 4 giant vultures, completely blocking the harbor entrance. Leading them was the 40-gun monster, the Queen Anne's Revenge. On the poop deck of the flagship, the legendary demon Blackbeard Edward Teach held a telescope, coldly looking down at the terrified city. Smoke drifted from his beard, and in his hand was a cup of rum mixed with gunpowder. This was the first and only time in history that a group of pirates dared to openly blockade a major city of the British Empire. It wasn't a robbery, it was a kidnapping. Blackbeard had kidnapped the entire city. The port was paralyzed. No ship could leave, no ship could enter. Any merchant vessel attempting to run the blockade would be blown to pieces by 40 cannons in an instant. That morning, a pilot boat named the Crowley foolishly tried to leave the harbor. Boom! Blackbeard didn't even use a live round. A single warning shot was enough to scare the ship into striking its sails. Pirates jumped aboard like monkeys, tying up everyone on the vessel. Among the captives was Samuel Wragg, a member of the Council of the Province of Carolina. This important figure was on his way to London for a vacation with his 4-year-old son. Now he knelt before Blackbeard, trembling uncontrollably. "This isn't a robbery, councilman." Blackbeard looked down at him, his voice raspy and calm. "This is a business transaction." What do you want?" Rag stammered. "Gold? Silver? Charleston has plenty of money." Blackbeard laughed. The smile looked hideous on that smoke-wreathed black face. "Money? I have plenty of money." He kicked a chest nearby, filled with gold coins. "I want something you have here." He leaned down, his terrifying face close to Rag's, the heavy smell of rum and gunpowder washing over the councilman. "I want medicine." Chapter 4. The Strangest Ransom. Yes, you heard that right. The pirate king who terrified the British Empire, the man who killed without blinking, had kidnapped a city and held dozens of VIP hostages, not for millions in gold, but for a chest of medicine. It sounds absurd, but this was the dirty truth of pirate life. In Nassau, on the sea, the enemy pirates feared most wasn't the Navy's cannons, but the invisible enemy, disease. Syphilis, gonorrhea, dysentery, scurvy. These pathogens ran rampant in the filthy, crowded holds. Blackbeard's hundreds of men, though fierce on the outside, were rotting on the inside. Their skin was covered in sores, their joints ached, some were going mad. Nassau had no doctors and no medicine, so Blackbeard decided to come to Charleston to buy drugs. He wrote out a list: mercury, the main treatment for syphilis at the time, opium, bandages, scalpels. The value of this chest was only a few £100, a fraction of the gold on his ship. "Take a message to your governor," Blackbeard told a released messenger. "If he doesn't send the medicine in 2 days, I will cut off the heads of Councilman Rag and the other hostages, put them in a basket, and send them to him as a gift." Charleston descended in panic. The governor roared in anger, wanting to mobilize the militia, but with the harbor blocked, he was helpless. Families of the hostages wept outside the governor's mansion. Time ticked by. On the Queen Anne's Revenge, the atmosphere grew tense. The wait was long. The pirates got drunk and started getting restless. "Why don't we just kill our way in? Just kill the hostages!" Blackbeard sat on the deck, braiding the pigtails in his beard, watching his men coldly. He knew this was a psychological game. If he killed the hostages, he lost. The Royal Navy would hunt him down at all costs, but he had to appear crazy enough to terrify the city. By the 3rd day, the medicine still hadn't arrived. Blackbeard stood up and drew his cutlass. He paced back and forth in front of the hostages, the blade scraping against the deck with a screeching sound. "Bring me the boy," he pointed at Councilman Rag's 4-year-old son. Rag broke down. He slammed his head against the deck, bleeding. "Kill me! Don't touch my child! The medicine is coming! It must be coming!" Just at this critical moment, a small boat rowed out from the harbor. It was flying a white flag. It was the medicine, a chest full of mercury and drugs. The governor had surrendered. Blackbeard inspected the medicine and nodded with satisfaction. He had secured a few £100 worth of drugs, but the reputation he gained was priceless. He had humiliated the entire North American colony. But before releasing the hostages, Blackbeard did something designed for maximum humiliation. "Take off your clothes," he told the aristocratic hostages in their silk suits. "What? You heard me. Strip." And so, under the gaze of thousands of Charleston citizens, the councilmen, merchants, and noblewomen, naked and utterly humiliated, were chased off the pirate ship and forced to row a small boat back to shore. The pirates lined the rails, erupting in deafening laughter. This wasn't for money. This was for power. Blackbeard was telling the world, under my cannons, your civilization and your dignity are worth nothing. Chapter 5. The King's Pardon. The humiliation of Charleston was the straw that broke the camel's back. The British Empire was furious. King George I realized that if he didn't completely excise the tumor that was Nassau, British trade in the Americas would be finished. But he didn't send a fleet to bomb it directly. He was smarter than that. He sent a man. Woodes Rogers. Remember this name. He was the terminator of the Golden Age of Piracy. A former privateer himself who had circumnavigated the globe, he bore a horrific scar on his face, a mark left by a bullet that had shattered his upper jaw. He understood pirates. He knew that against these desperadoes, paper was more useful than cannons. July 1718. A British warship, the HMS Delicia, sailed into Nassau harbor. This time, the pirates didn't fire, because the ship didn't run out its guns. It raised a white flag and delivered a document. This was the famous Act of Grace, commonly known as the King's Pardon. The terms were simple. Any pirate who surrendered before September 5, 1718, would have all past crimes wiped clean. You could keep your stolen money and even get a plot of land under the new government. But if you refused, it was death. It was a brilliant move. Nassau instantly split in two. For old pirates like Benjamin Hornigold, this was manna from heaven. He had made enough money, and he was tired. He wanted to wash his hands clean and live the life of a respectable gentleman with his loot. "This is our only chance, brothers," Hornigold shouted on the beach. "Sign this paper, and we are no longer wanted men. We can go home." Hundreds of pirates lined up to sign. They were sick of drifting at sea, sick of being hunted. But for another group, this was a slavery contract. Charles Vane, the hardest bone in Nassau, an anarchist even more fanatical than Blackbeard. He stood in the crowd, watching his former brothers queuing to surrender, his eyes full of contempt. "You cowards!" Vane roared. "Have you forgotten why we came here? For freedom! Now you want to lick the king's boots just to survive?" Vane drew his sword and pointed it at the British warship. "I will never surrender. I'd rather be a captain in hell than a sailor in heaven." And Blackbeard? He stood in the distance, watching it all coldly. He didn't get in line, nor did he roar like Vane. His eyes were complicated. He knew Nassau was finished. The lawless republic crumbled before this thin piece of paper. He turned and walked back to the Queen Anne's Revenge. He had his own plans. He was going to play a bigger game. Volume 3, The Empire Strikes Back. Chapter 1, The Split. The last night of the Pirate Republic of Nassau was lit by fire, not moonlight. Woodes Rogers, the new royal governor, had officially taken control of the island. His warships formed a blockade across the harbor mouth, their cannons primed. Inside the harbor, over 1,000 pirates had surrendered, accepting the king's pardon. They were now reformed subjects, at least on paper. But Charles Vane was still in the harbor, and Charles Vane did not kneel. Rogers sent a final ultimatum to Vane: surrender immediately or be blown out of the water. Vane's response was the most spectacular middle finger in the history of piracy. That night, Vane ordered his men to prepare one of his prize ships, a French merchant vessel he had captured earlier. They didn't load it with cargo. They loaded it with tar, pitch, and every barrel of gunpowder they had left. Aim the bow at the British flagship. Light it up. The torch touched the tar. In seconds, the French ship transformed into a massive fire ship, a dragon of wood and flame. Catching the wind, it drifted straight toward the HMS Delicia and the HMS Rose, the pride of the British blockade. Panic erupted on the British decks. Fire was the greatest fear of any wooden ship. If that floating bomb collided with them, the entire fleet would go up in splinters. "Cut the anchor cables! Move! Move!" the British captains screamed in terror. The disciplined naval formation collapsed. Ships scrambled to get out of the way, drifting aimlessly, their blockade broken. A gap opened in the line. This was exactly what Vane was waiting for. Now! His fast sloop, the Ranger, shot forward like an arrow released from a bow. With Vane at the helm, the pirate ship sped through the confusion, straight for the open sea. As the Ranger passed the governor's flagship, Charles Vane stood on the quarterdeck. He didn't fire a musket. He didn't shout a curse. Instead, he turned his back to the governor, dropped his breeches, and mooned the representative of the king. Then he ordered a single cannon shot fired in defiance. Boom! The ball flew harmlessly over the British ship, a final insult. Vane laughed maniacally as his ship disappeared into the dark ocean. He was telling the world, the pirates aren't dead. The war continues. But on the shore, watching the Ranger vanish, Benjamin Hornigold felt only bitterness. He stood next to the governor, watching his former brother-in-arms turn into an enemy. Hornigold had just signed the pardon. He was officially a king's friend now. Governor Rogers walked up to Hornigold, watching the flames of the fire ship dying down on the water. "You know these waters, Mr. Hornigold," Rogers said coldly, "and you know how these men think." "What do you want me to do?" Hornigold asked, though he already knew the answer. Rogers handed him a new parchment. It wasn't a letter of marque this time. It was a commission. "I want you to hunt them down, dead or alive, especially Vane, and especially that devil Blackbeard." Hornigold's hand trembled slightly as he took the paper. It was history's cruelest joke. The founder of the Pirate Republic had just become its gravedigger.
Chapter 2. The Hunter. Pirates hunting pirates. It is the bloodiest game on earth because the hunter knows the prey too well. Benjamin Hornigold didn't need a map. He knew every hidden cove in Cuba, every smuggling route in the Florida Keys, and exactly which islands Vane and Blackbeard preferred for fresh water. Late 1718, the Caribbean witnessed a heartbreaking chase. Hornigold took command of a heavily armed sloop, flying the Union Jack, and began to clean house. He showed no mercy. Off the coast of Cuba, he cornered a ship run by his former subordinates. When the pirates saw the Ranger approaching, they cheered, waving their hats. They thought it was their old Commodore coming to join them for a drink or a raid. Hornigold answered their waves with a broadside of cannon fire. The battle was short and brutal. Hornigold boarded the ship not as a brother, but as an executioner. He arrested the men he had once shared rum with. He dragged them back to Jamaica. He didn't plead for their lives. He watched as they were tried and sentenced. At the gallows, the scene was tragic. "Why, Benjamin, why?" one of the condemned pirates screamed at him as the noose was tightened. "You were the one who taught us to be free." Hornigold watched him with a stone face, his eyes hollow. "Freedom has a price, son," he whispered to himself, "and I want to live." The trapdoor opened. The body swung. Hornigold turned away. He had bought his safety with the blood of his friends. But despite his ruthlessness, he couldn't catch the two biggest fish. Charles Vane roamed the high seas like a ghost, striking and vanishing before Hornigold could arrive. And Blackbeard? Blackbeard had gone north. Edward Teach had played a move smarter than anyone expected. He went to North Carolina. He sailed into Bathtown and presented himself to Governor Charles Eden. He took the pardon. He settled down on Ocracoke Island, a place perfectly suited for his needs.
On the surface, the devil had retired. He even married a 16-year-old local girl. But Hornigold knew better. A wolf doesn't eat grass. Blackbeard wasn't retiring. He was building a base. He had corrupted Governor Eden. They were partners. Blackbeard would rob ships out at sea, bring the goods back to Ocracoke, and the governor's court would declare the loot as found salvage. They split the profits. It was a perfect racket. Blackbeard mocked Rogers, mocked Hornigold, and mocked the so-called civilized order from the safety of his legal protection. In Nassau, Governor Rogers was pleased with Hornigold's progress, but he knew the truth. As long as Blackbeard lived, the black flag would never truly fall. His legend was too strong. "Hornigold, you've done well," Rogers said, looking at the map of North Carolina. "But some prey requires a fiercer dog." Hornigold had failed to kill the legend. Now the empire would have to do it itself. Down in Virginia, Governor Alexander Spotswood was watching Blackbeard's retirement with growing fury. He didn't care about jurisdiction. He didn't care that Blackbeard was technically pardoned in another colony. He wanted the pirate dead. He summoned a young, ambitious officer from the Royal Navy, Lieutenant Robert Maynard. "I want you to take 2 sloops, no markings, no heavy cannons, just men. Go to Ocracoke, and do not come back without his head." The final hunt had begun. This time, it wasn't an offer of amnesty, it was an assassination mission. The moment of decision had arrived. Volume 4, Dead Men Tell No Tales. Chapter 1, The Betrayal of Charles Vane. Charles Vane, the madman who mooned the British Navy in Nassau Harbor, always believed he would die in a blaze of glory amidst the roar of cannons and the smell of smoke. He was wrong. It wasn't the British Navy that killed him. It was the pirates' own most sacred rule, the vote. Late 1718, Vane's luck had finally dried run. Out on the open sea, he encountered a French warship. It was a massive vessel, bristling with heavy firepower. Vane was a fanatic, but he wasn't an idiot. He looked at the enemy's gun ports, calculated the odds, and ordered a retreat. "We can't take her! Hard to starboard!" Vane roared. It was a sensible tactical decision, but in the eyes of his quartermaster, Calico Jack, it was cowardice. Rackham was an opportunist, a man who wore flashy calico coats and craved power. He saw his chance to seize the captaincy. He rallied the crew on the deck, shouting over the wind. "Vane is old, he's scared," Rackham yelled, pointing at the retreating French ship. "We are pirates, we don't run. That ship has gold in her hold, and Vane is making us run away like dogs." Under the Articles of Agreement, the crew had the right to vote to remove a captain. The result was catastrophic for Vane. The overwhelming majority voted for Rackham. Just like that, Charles Vane, the toughest captain in the Caribbean, was stripped of his command. Rackham gave him a small, leaky sloop, threw a few loyalists in with him, and cast them adrift in the vast ocean to rot. It was a humiliation worse than death. Months later, a hurricane wrecked their small boat. Vane washed up on a deserted island off Honduras. For weeks he lived like a savage, surviving on turtles and rainwater. He thought he was saved when a passing ship anchored for water. Vane hid his identity, working as a common sailor, scrubbing decks, hoping to slip away to Jamaica. But his face was too famous. The captain of the ship was Holford, a man Vane had robbed years earlier. When Holford recognized the dirty, broken man scrubbing his deck as the notorious pirate king, he laughed. "God has a sense of humor, doesn't he, Charles?" Vane was chained and hauled to Port Royal, Jamaica. March 2021, the gallows. Before the hangman did his work, the priest asked if he had any final confession. Vane looked up, his wild eyes undimmed by years of hardship. He didn't beg, he didn't cry. "I do not repent," Vane told the crowd, his voice terrifyingly calm. "My conscience tells me I have wronged no man." The rope tightened. The uncompromising soul of the pirate age swung in the wind. His body was dipped in tar and hung in a cage at Gun Cay, a rotting warning to every sailor entering the harbor. Vane was dead. Rackham was now captain. But he would soon discover that the deadliest things on his ship weren't the cannons, but 2 women.
Chapter 2. The Hellcats. In the world of pirates, women were considered bad luck. Bringing a woman on board was a cardinal sin. But Jack Rackham broke the rule. He didn't just bring 1, he brought 2. Anne Bonny, the illegitimate daughter of an Irish lawyer. She had fiery red hair and a temper to match. She had abandoned her husband to follow Rackham, chasing the thrill of the outlaw life. Mary Reed, a warrior raised as a boy who had served in the army and fought in Flanders. Her swordsmanship was better than most men's. These 2 women met on Rackham's ship. They dressed in men's clothes, wore pistols and cutlasses at their waists, and fought with a ferocity that shamed the male crew. When the pirates hesitated on deck, it was often these 2 women who led the charge, screaming curses and hacking down enemies. But Rackham was a complete failure of a captain. He was good at drinking fine wine and wearing pretty clothes, but when the heat came, he melted. October 1720. The coast of Jamaica. A sloop commissioned by the governor to hunt pirates spotted Rackham's ship. At the time, Rackham and his men were throwing a party on deck, dead drunk on rum. When the pirate hunter fired a warning shot, the drunken crew panicked. "Hide! Get to the hold!" Rackham screamed, terrified. He and every single male crew member scrambled down the hatch like rats, praying the enemy wouldn't see them. Only 2 people remained on deck, Anne Bonny and Mary Reed. The 2 women looked at the cowards hiding below with pure rage. Mary Reed even drew her pistol and fired a shot down into the cargo hold, screaming, "Come out and fight, you cowardly dogs! If there's a man among you, come up and die on the deck!" No one moved. So the 2 women drew their cutlasses and faced the entire crew of the pirate hunter alone. They fought back to back, swinging their weapons, cursing the enemy and their own crew in equal measure. They wounded several boarding soldiers, but against the overwhelming numbers, it was a doomed fight. Eventually, they were overpowered and pinned to the deck. When they were dragged to prison to await trial, Anne Bonny was allowed to visit Rackham one last time before his execution. Rackham looked at his lover, hoping for a shred of comfort or a tearful goodbye. But Anne Bonny looked at the weeping man with cold eyes and delivered the line that would echo through history. "I am sorry to see you here, but if you had fought like a man, you need not be hanged like a dog." The most ironic scene of the Golden Age ended there. The men were all hanged. The 2 women, pleading their bellies, claiming pregnancy, were granted a stay of execution. Now only the last and greatest demon remained on the stage, Blackbeard. Chapter 3. The Trap at Ocracoke. November 1718, Ocracoke Inlet, North Carolina. Blackbeard thought he was safe. He was living a semi-retired life here. The local governor, Charles Eden, was his umbrella, or rather his partner. Blackbeard would rob ships at sea, bring the goods back, and the governor would help fence the stolen cargo. They split the profits. It was a perfect sanctuary. Ocracoke Inlet was shallow and filled with shifting sandbars. Large British warships couldn't enter. Blackbeard parked his massive Queen Anne's Revenge further out and took his smaller sloop, the Adventure, with 20 hand-picked men to party. But he underestimated one man, Alexander Spotswood, the governor of Virginia.
Spotswood was a hard man. He was tired of Blackbeard loitering on his doorstep, and he was sick of his neighbor's governor's corruption. He decided to act outside the law. Paying out of his own pocket, he hired Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy. He gave him 2 sloops without naval markings, the Pearl and the Lime. It was a secret assassination mission. Lieutenant Maynard was the model British officer, cool, disciplined, and superstitious about nothing. He didn't fear the demon legends of Blackbeard. He believed in drill and discipline. Sunset, November 21st. Maynard's 2 small sloops quietly approached the mouth of Ocracoke Inlet. To avoid alerting Blackbeard, Maynard didn't fly the naval ensign. He kept no lights lit. He ordered his soldiers to hide below deck, leaving only a few men above to row and steer. Blackbeard's lookout spotted the 2 strange sloops, but didn't pay much attention. They assumed they were lost merchant vessels, or perhaps smugglers coming to trade. That night, Blackbeard drank heavily. Legend says he felt a premonition of doom. When a crewman asked him, "If you die in battle, does your wife know where you buried your treasure?" Blackbeard laughed a dark laugh and spoke his famous last words. "Only the devil and I know where it is, and the one who lives the longest will take it all." The night deepened. The inlet fell to a deathly silence. Lieutenant Maynard sat in his cabin, polishing his sword. He knew that when the sun rose, he would either carry Blackbeard's head back home or become just another victim of the legend. There was no retreat. Dawn, mist covered the water. The tide began to rise. Maynard gave the order, "Raise the king's colors, full speed ahead." The 2 British sloops charged into the inlet like hunting dogs. Blackbeard was woken by the alarm. He rushed to the deck and saw the Navy flags, but he didn't panic. In fact, he looked excited. "Damn you, villains! Cut the cables! Raise sails! Bring the guns around!" Even with only 20 men, Blackbeard had the gunpowder advantage. The Adventure carried 8 cannons. Maynard's boats had none, only small arms. "Show them hell!" Blackbeard personally lit the fuses. Boom! Boom! At point-blank range, a broadside of grape shot, bags filled with nails and lead balls, swept the decks of the British ships. Maynard's second ship, the Lime, was instantly crippled, its captain killed. Maynard's own ship, the Pearl, was devastated, the deck littered with debris and bodies. "They're all dead!" Blackbeard laughed through the smoke. "Board them! Cut them to pieces!" This was Blackbeard's fatal mistake. He saw the empty deck of the Pearl and assumed the British were wiped out. He led his men, jumping through the smoke onto the enemy ship. He didn't know that Maynard had hidden his surviving Marines in the cargo hold. The moment Blackbeard's boots hit the deck, Maynard sprang from cover and signaled, "Now!" Dozens of heavily armed British soldiers poured out of the hatch like ghosts. The trap snapped shut. A brutal melee erupted on the narrow, slippery deck. Muskets fired at face-touching distance. Cutlasses hacked into bone with dull thuds. Blackbeard and Maynard came face to face. It was the duel of destiny, the demon versus the officer. Both men drew pistols and fired simultaneously. Blackbeard missed, but Maynard's bullet struck Blackbeard's body. For a normal man, that shot would have been the end, but Blackbeard just staggered. Like a wounded bear, he roared and charged at Maynard, swinging his heavy cutlass down. Maynard raised his sword to parry. Clang! The force of the blow was so immense that Maynard's sword shattered at the hilt. Blackbeard raised his blade again, ready to deliver the killing strike. Just in that split second, a British soldier rushed from behind and slashed Blackbeard across the throat. Blood sprayed out in a jet. But Blackbeard still didn't fall. He spun around, killing the soldier who had cut him. It was inhuman vitality. He had been shot 5 times. He had been cut 20 times. Blood cascaded down his black coat like a waterfall, but he was still fighting. He was still swinging his sword, spitting blood foam, cursing everyone around him. The British soldiers were terrified. Was this man unkillable? Was he truly a demon? Finally, as he tried to cock another pistol, his movement slowed. He stopped. The wild fire in his black eyes slowly faded. He looked around at the bodies as if searching for something. Then, like a collapsing tower, he fell heavily onto the deck. Dead silence. Maynard walked forward and carefully kicked the giant body. No movement. The demon was dead. Maynard ordered Blackbeard's head to be cut off. When that gruesome head, with its tangled black beard and wide-open eyes, was hung from the bowsprit of the Pearl, the legend ended. They say when Blackbeard's headless body was thrown into the sea, it swam around the ship 3 times before sinking. It was sailors' superstition, of course, or perhaps even the ocean didn't want to accept such a soul. Chapter 5. The End of an Era. When Maynard returned to Virginia with Blackbeard's head swinging from the bowsprit, the crowds flocked to the harbor. They didn't come to cheer, they came to verify that the nightmare was truly over. Blackbeard's death was a signal. The backbone of the Golden Age of Piracy was broken. In the following years, the Royal Navy conducted a carpet-cleaning operation across the Caribbean. Bartholomew Roberts, the last great pirate king, was killed by grape shot, tearing through his throat. The rest were hunted down, hanged, or forced to live like rats in dark corners. Nassau changed. The pirate tents were torn down, replaced with orderly stone houses, churches, and prisons. The streets were no longer filled with drunks and whores, but by patrolling soldiers and merchants in silk. The law returned, order returned, civilization returned. That short, crazy, bloody utopia dissipated like a hangover. How should we judge these men? Were they murderous criminals? Absolutely. But they were also rebels in a rigid age. In a time when the common man could only be a slave, a laborer, or cannon fodder, they chose a different path. Even if that path led to hell, at least for a moment on the way there, they were their own masters. Today, the Caribbean sun still shines brightly. Tourists sunbathe on beaches once stained with blood, drinking rum named after these men. They listen to sanitized, Disney-fied pirate stories. But late at night, when the sea breeze howls through the palm trees, if you listen closely, you can still hear the echoes from the past. It is the boom of black powder, the clash of cutlasses, and the secrets that dead men tell no tales of. And that eternal oath? Under this black flag, we declare war on the world.